ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, cartoonist of Evil Inc. and editor of Webcomics.com.
And I'm Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon, and this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. And welcome, Brad, to the new year.
Wow, it's fantastic. It feels all shiny and new.
or very tired.
Yeah, you guys took the kids to Disneyland yesterday. Is that right?
We did, yes. So I started the new year with 9 miles of walking. I checked my Apple Watch. It was 9 miles of walking, and for a cartoonist, that's death.
Well, and plus you've got smaller kids than mine, so I know that that's not only 9 miles of walking, but it's 9 miles of also carrying.
Oh God! Oh Brad! Oh, imagine having walked like 7 miles, and then someone says, "Oh, also, can you carry this 40-pound sack of flour for a while?"
Yeah,
can you carry this sack of flour over to Fantasyland? And you're like, "But my feet! I know, I'm also a human. Can someone carry me?"
No such luck for you. I noticed by the time my kids, were out of the toddler phase, my arms had gotten quite big because I was constantly hoisting them up on my shoulders, through carrying them here and there. You get being a dad is a really, really good workout.
Well, as you know well, and as anyone who's ever seen me can attest, I'm ripped. I'm just so ripped that from carrying kids around, I can literally bench press 400, 500 pounds.
Well, you're a monster.
Cut to reality, which is that just someone has strapped a small Italian carry-on luggage to my belly permanently that I can't get rid of. All right, New Year's resolutions. How do I get rid of the small Italian luggage that's strapped around my stomach?
Well, yeah, that's another thing that's true. Having a little bit of a belly is a plus because you've got a little ledge there you can work with.
No, honey, I'm doing it for the kids.
That's right. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So, how are you facing the year? Are you upbeat about 2018? Are you sad? Are you trepidatious? Ooh, look at that word. Are you trepidatious about 2018?
Is good. No, I actually am. I'm really looking forward to this year. Business wise and comic wise, 2017 was fantastic. Even if nothing else about 2017 was particularly good. The comic and my business really blossomed over 2017, and I'm just charged up. I'm ready to tackle 2018 and see what I can make happen. I think I've got. It was kind of funny. Both times I brought up, New Year's and old years type stuff with my family and with my extended family. There was a lot of grumbling and groaning, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I know. There was a lot of stuff on a larger scale that wasn't great about 2017, and that can't be discounted. But there's a lot of things that we have to be thankful for. Everybody was healthy, everybody was relatively happy, and geez, like I said, a lot of things went right. And I'm just anxious to see what we can make happen in 2018. What about you?
Yeah, no, I am facing 2018 with a huge amount of optimism. And part of that is because I make all these charts and graphs for the year ahead between Christmas and New Year's. Mm-hmm. I get super excited. Like as soon as Christmas is the presents are all unwrapped and I've had my 9th Christmas mince pie or whatever it is. Mince pie. I've literally never had a mince pie in my entire life. Why did I?
You're calling yourself on your.
What?
You couldn't even let yourself have that. We would have all believed that you ate mince pie. It would have been okay.
I literally don't even know what a mince pie is. I don't even. That's such a Charles Dickens type food. So could I have another mince pie? I think it's meat based. Is that what a mince pie is?
I think it is. I think it's like similar to maybe like a pot pie or a shepherd's pie.
Yeah.
It has minced meat in it,
Well, let me correct that for the folks at home. After I've had my ninth just straight up pie, just eating a whole pie by
Minced or
myself,
otherwise.
minced or otherwise. But one of my favorite things to do is like still kind of in PJs, slippers on, coffee. I start planning out the year ahead, and I get really jazzed about it. I get really excited because you kind of have to formulate all these ideas about the year ahead, but then when you start putting it down, at least to me, on calendar form, where I'm blocking out dates like, okay, this is going to take me about a month and a half to do while still cartooning. And then I need to put that book together. That's going to take about a couple of weeks. And then you can start to move projects around and see which one comes first and see which one is tenable or untenable. And it gets me really excited for the year ahead. Like I'm excited to be a cartoonist and to do what I do this year. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've got to do that. I've got to go down to Staples and get my little calendar inserts for my planner, so I can. I've got two things really kind of hovering right now. I want to do that, and I just wrapped up a storyline for Evil Inc., and I need to sit down and map out these storylines now. I've kind of stopped doing Evil Inc. as a strip and started doing it more like a 22-page comic that I update in plausible segments. And so I'm really mapping out the next 6 months of the site, of the public facing site. And that's exciting because now that I'm 2 years into doing it this way, and we might need to talk about this sometime. I stumbled upon it was basically a guide for sitcom writers. And it talked about how sitcoms were kind of written by the minute. The first 3 minutes, this happens. The next 4 minutes, story A happens. The next 5 minutes, story B is introduced. And then it goes back and forth, and you've got to hit certain points. I'd love to know what Gloria thinks about this, because I don't know whether it's widespread or in wide use. But what I realized was this came out to a 22-minute sitcom. And it had guides for where this story should kind of be at every point. Not that you had to follow it exactly, but just to kind of help formulate your story, how to help shape it. And I realized that if I considered a minute to be a page, this translated directly into a 22-page comic.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
for the last 2 years, that's how I've been writing Evil Inc. I've been following this sitcom format with an A-B story, kind of like Seinfeld used to be, right? They'd have one story introduced and another story, and then they'd go back and forth between these two, and then the two would collide at the end, which was a very satisfying format for comedy.
Well, that's kind of fascinating because that format so specifically was put together for commercial breaks. Like you had to have a satisfying emotional break moment so that soap could be talked about for 2 minutes, or cars could be sold at you.
You're right.
So that when you jump back in, it was a natural beat. So that's fascinating though that you have made that work for a 22-page comic. I guess if you just throw out the commercials, who cares?
Yeah.
Then it still works. That's great.
Well, and the whole point is, every page, actually for me, every half page has to be an emotional beat, because that's what I'm posting. So every half page has to kind of stand on its own. There has to be something that's introduced and something that happens that's satisfying in that half page.
Right.
And that actually, what I found is that tightens up your writing, and it forces you to get to the point. Whereas a lot of webcomics that I read, when I review them for webcomics.com and stuff, there's a lot of people that are just lingering around. It almost feels like they're trying to stretch it out. And good writing, in my opinion, especially humor writing, gets to the point. Boom, this is the thing. And tomorrow's going to be another thing, or next week is going to be another thing. But get to the darn point, and then let that survive on its own.
Well, let me back out a second, because I'm fascinated by your selection of a 22-page final product. And this actually will tie into resolutions, which is what we want to talk about today. So how did you settle on 22 pages, and how does that 22 pages fit into your larger schematic for what you do day to day, week to week? Like, why do you produce 22 pages
Well,
for Evil Ink?
it basically, I think now I haven't picked up a comic book to be honest with you, a print comic book in a long time, but that was about what print comics were when I was reading them, right? So
Right.
it seemed like that 22 minute that transitioning into a 22 page just felt kind of natural. And then when I
Oh, so but it literally grew out of that guide of
it grew
sitcom
right out
writing.
of that. Yeah, it grew
Oh,
right
okay.
out of that sitcom deal. And then what I found out was, I'll take like counting the breaks that I take. Like I've finally relaxed enough to take a Christmas break. So like last week, I just posted, basically archive stuff that I had previously posted on Patreon. And I'm doing the same thing this week because I want to take my time now and sit down and really map the more time you put into this in the beginning stages, the better your writing is because you can see all those little connections that happen. So by the time you factor the breaks that I'll take throughout the year here and there, it really works out to very close to that 22 page broken up, half a page. Basically, it's 22 pages a week. I'm sorry, one weekly page. It broke down to almost neatly into 6 months.
And so for you, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask about that is for you, that 22 pages and Evil Link as a website, broadly speaking, you still view as kind of a loss leader now towards getting people towards your Patreon, right?
No kind of about it. It is absolute. Well, no. Let me back up. Most like
No kind of about it. Well, hold on. There's a couple kind about.
there's a couple of kind ofs. No, in my mind, there's no kind of about it. Now, what I'm going to find, I'm really interested to find out is probably, unless something changes drastically within the next couple of weeks, the first Kickstarter of the year is going to be the graphic novel that collects the first 2 years of the new Evil Ink. The Evil Ink that I've been doing since 2012 under this sitcom format. And I want to know whether people are interested in it. What I've always said time and time again is that a Kickstarter is free market research. There's no shame in a failed Kickstarter. It just means that you weren't ready for the market or the market wasn't ready for you. You take that information and you use it. That's right. Exactly what I'm going to be doing in the first quarter of 2018. I want to see whether Evil Ink is truly a loss leader or whether it's got the fan support, the reader support, the quality to stand on its own and to be its own thing, that I can do both, or whether it's just something that I do to keep a live website so that I can drive people to Patreon. It's one of those two outcomes is going to be the answer at the end of the first quarter here, and I'd like to know that Evil Ink stood on its own, the comic that I was doing, but I'm also quite prepared to find out that it's the loss leader for all the After Dark stuff I'm doing.
Well, and how would you anything change if it won't fail? But if the Kickstarter didn't work the way you wanted to, what would change for you, or maybe nothing?
No, what would happen is I would continue to do it as I'm doing it right now, but there probably wouldn't be a big effort towards putting out any more print collections.
And if it succeeded, how would that change things?
Then I've got to step up my game on Kickstarters and self-publishing in general, and make sure that I'm putting those out enough, putting out those print collections of the Evil Ink public-facing stuff, so that I'm not letting those readers down, which basically I've been doing for the last couple of years now. Technically, there was 9 Evil Ink graphic novels. There technically should be a 10th before I even do the book that I'm doing. I'm technically skipping a book, but I don't want to. You know how I used to do those Evil Ink graphic novels. I'd take the comic strips and slice them up and lay out a graphic novel page instead of just doing a comic strip collection. Well, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that with the time that I've got to put into this. So even if I took those and just did a straight up comic strip collection, there would be enough to fill up an entire graphic novel, like an 80 to 120 page graphic novel, before I even get to the new Evil Ink, which I started in January of 2016. So that's a lot of publishing that I've missed. And I need what would happen. In fact, I may build this into the Kickstarter itself. I need to, if the fan support, if the reader support is strong enough, then I've got to go back and get that 10th book for the people that do want it, or build it into this Kickstarter that I'll be launching in this quarter.
Yeah, the idea of a large gap of time between last publishing is something that I face with Sheldon.
Yeah.
Where I did for about 8 years, I did 2 books a year, gathering up and printing basically the content for the previous 6 months or so. And then as I found that sales tapered off, to be quite frank, and if I ever went back to that model, I'd have years to republish or to publish for the first time.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I would do it. It's an interesting problem that I frankly don't face, because now Drive, my science fiction strip, has taken up such both joy in my heart and reader interest that is the primary. That will absolutely get published and is on a schedule every 2 years. We do a 300-page book or whatever, and then Sheldon now. What I have found is that the occasional themed book is the better way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I will do, I've done literature, as you know, in the past, collecting all literary strips. I've done coffee strips, collecting all the coffee strips. I've done 2 pug books. And now this coming year, I'm going to be kickstarting a giant pug omnibus, which is the French version of omnibus. And so that's going to be all color and 300 pages.
Really?
Cover. Yeah, it's going to be real pretty. But I've found that when you reach a certain critical mass, and maybe this is only after 10 years of publishing, if the regular material is not working, you can do a little dance and find another way to publish some of that material, and it works out just fine. If you kind of take it like you did with Evil Ink, where some of that material is a lost leader to keep people reading, that's okay. I still enjoyed making it, and it kept them reading, and it kept me working as a cartoonist. That's fine. Once, like right now, there are 4,000 Sheldon strips in the archives, and once you get to a couple of thousand, not everyone has to be your precious child that you will forever cherish. Do you know what I mean?
That's the truth. That's the truth.
When I was first starting out, every comic had to be in the book, and if it wasn't in the book, boy, it was a real consideration why it wasn't. Whereas now I'm like, man, that one looks dumb. I messed up on that one. I'm not doing that one. Like, there's a billion reasons why I wouldn't include a comic in a collection now.
So that was kind of what my next question to you was going to be. And that is, if you've got a comic idea, but it doesn't fit into one of those categories, literature, pugs, coffee, etc., are you that much less likely or interested to do that comic? In other words, do you try to fill those books subconsciously more, or do you got an idea and that's the idea you're running with?
Well, no, I don't edit away ideas. So for example, like if I'm got a pug omnibus coming up, right? I don't say, well, I can't do this strip about Stephen Hawking because he's not a pug. But what will happen is, and you know this creatively, is your mind subconsciously and consciously starts focusing on a topic, so that if you know you have a book that's going into production in 6 months, for better or for worse, your brain starts working on that as ideas and fodder. Yeah. And so you happen to generate more ideas, but you don't necessarily edit away ideas. You just get more in the theme that you're working on.
Right.
So for me, I was going to say it's kind of additive, not subtractive, if that makes sense.
And really, it's not impossible that Stephen Hawking couldn't have a pug in his lap.
Yeah. depending on how you want to stretch it, yes, you could absolutely be like, oh, look at that. There's a pug on his head. So yeah. But
that one goes in the book.
Yeah, that's going in. But what a different version of that same question is that the best cartoon that I ever produced might never see print because it doesn't fit into a topic that I ended up doing a book on, if that makes sense, you know?
So now the way you got your career kind of mapped out for the foreseeable, you don't see yourself doing any more generic Sheldon collections?
I don't foresee that, no. And I'm kind of at peace with that, frankly.
How do your readers react to that? Because I know you're still doing a lot of comic conventions and stuff, or not a lot, but definitely more than me. Is this something that they push back on to any degree?
Well, yes, there are a few. You know the kind of stalwart fan that
Yes.
who will push a product idea regardless of the sellability to anyone else on the planet. So there's that person to begin with. But for example, they'll be like, hey, that comic that you did about Stephen Hawking with a pug up his nose, why isn't that a poster and a book and a postcard and a keychain? And you're like, listen, you're the only one that liked that one. No one else liked that.
The worst.
I'm not making that into a poster.
I mean, God love them, because, you know, we spent years
wanting that person to exist.
Wanting somebody to care about what we were doing. And now this person comes along and it's like, okay, I get it. But throttle it back a little bit.
Right. It's like when your mom is like, have you considered just going on one of the late night shows to talk about your comics? Yeah, okay, Mom, I get it. That's not, thank you for loving me, but this is not how it works.
Thank you for loving me.
But so that super fan, you just have to say, thank you for loving me, but I'm not making that into a poster. But anyway.
Yes and no, I will say this, because I've done this, if only for the satisfaction of I know what's going to happen next. Sites like Redbubble do super great quality work, and you can upload an image in a heartbeat and have that print for somebody ready to go. In fact, this happened to me in December. I put something, just to bring this kind of full circle, I've been still plugging away at trying to get some steam going on Instagram. I'm telling you, Dave, nobody likes me on Instagram.
Oh no. All right.
But I've been posting some single panel work, and I did one, and immediately somebody says, you know what they said? This has to be a print. And so I saw the thing come up, and I was sitting in front of my computer at the time, so it took me exactly 5 minutes to upload this to Redbubble, generate a link, send it back to them, and say, there's your print. Now buy it. And it's the last time I ever heard from him.
Yeah,
but I knew that was going to happen.
The follow-up to that is, this has to be a print for someone else to own.
For someone else, yeah. It's the hardest thing to convince younger web cartoonists about. But the fact of the matter is, the first person that tells you that they want to see XYZ on a T-shirt is the first person to disappear when you bring that T-shirt out.
Yeah, it's the same person that's requesting features for your website that has never donated to Patreon. You're like, why don't you offer lasers that shoot out from your computer when you read your website? By the way, I've never bought anything and I'm not giving you Patreon. But I would like to see 7 more features added immediately. Yeah, so for me, but anyway, to get back to your question, so I have come to peace with the fact that Sheldon. I largely feel that Sheldon is in its denouement period of its existence, which is okay by me. I have come to peace with the fact that, like, having thought about stepping away from it and focusing just on Drive, I don't think that's a good idea because A, I still like that world enough for it to still exist, and B, I have basically just changed my expectations of it. Whereas a decade ago, I was going to produce one of those every day, 7 days a week. If I had a flu, if someone died, like nothing was stopping me from doing Sheldon. Now, I maybe do 1 a week. I maybe do 3 a week. I maybe do 4 a week. most likely one. But I will do it when the mood strikes and when it's feeling right. And it's more like how Kate Beaton does it. And I always respected that about her. She's like, no, I'm not feeling it this week, and so nothing's going up. And then sometimes, go ahead.
Well, I think that particularly, the world of webcomics is bigger than the four of us when we did Webcomics Weekly, but we were a pretty loud voice. And back then we were banging the drum. And truthfully, back then we had a reason to. That's the world we were living in. Right. There was a reason to do it. But back then, man, we beat the drum about you've got to update your site every day, or as close to every day as you can. And not only that, but it's got to go up at the same time every day.
Yes.
And it's got to be as consistent as the stroke of a clock. And today, since we're not an ad-driven, most of us aren't doing ad-driven sites anymore, and with the addition of social media, and it's people are not going to our sites every day. They're not putting us in RSS feeds. Some of them are, obviously. But that's not the majority. The most of your people that are reading your comic are following you on social media, and they're getting the comic that way.
Right.
That's
and
great news.
And to continue that point, anyone new that's finding your comic is not finding it on your site. They're finding it via social media. So
exactly.
All the growth areas are coming from passive reception of your comics, not actively searching it out.
But I find so many younger cartoonists that still kind of take that earlier iteration of webcomics, and they feel they need to do this. And it's like, how big should my buffer be? How many comics should I have in the hopper? And it's like, you know what? You don't need to do that anymore. You do need to focus on finding a social media that you can manipulate well, whether that's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. Find at least one of those that your stuff resonates, and by all means, put that time into building a social media following and making sure that you've got a organic reach there. Right. But you don't have to do this every day anymore. And there's so many people that remember that advice we gave 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. And they're hopelessly out of date.
Right. So for me with Sheldon, the doing it when the mood strikes is perfectly fine for what I want it to be right now, which is I want it to be an enjoyable read that really only the good stuff gets, there's no forced comics anymore. What goes in the archives now is I really had this genuine idea that I liked, and I did it, and it was satisfying for me, and hopefully you like it as well. But it's not, oh God, it's Tuesday, so I got to do a Tuesday strip. That's not what Sheldon is anymore.
Well, how many Sheldons did you do on the lunch tray of an airplane?
Oh God. Brad, yeah, no, that's totally, or even worse than that. Back in the day when I used to work at Mattel, how many did I do out in the parking lot in my car on my lunch break because I had to keep that schedule? Or, how many did I do after just coming back literally from a funeral and the rest of the family's gone to bed and I'm still up at night doing a comic?
Yeah.
But that being said, do I regret any of those moments? No. I mean, in your 20s, you kind of have to put in the time too. You
needed to do that at that time. Webcomics was a completely different publishing system back then. It's just nice that we don't need to do that now.
Right, but I also feel like I absolutely acknowledge that I'm speaking now from a point of privilege in my career, which is I put in the time in my 20s and to a large extent in my 30s, and now in my 40s I can slow down to do the kind of comics and the style of comics and the timing of comics that I enjoy and that keeps me creative. So I know, though, that I had to do that in my 20s to get those 10,000 hours of practice in so that I could do the kind of cartooning that I can do now.
Oh, God. Well, I you know what's going to happen. We're not going to talk about resolutions because that leads directly into another topic that you and I both want to discuss.
What's that?
Would you be doing this? Would you be doing this at 40 years old? What is it about comics that makes you think that you should be doing this at 40?
Well, All right.
And if we
you know
go
what?
down that, we're at the halfway mark already. If we go down that hole, we're never going to get to resolutions.
Okay, let's save that for next week. Why? Like, that's a great topic for episode 2 of ComicLab, which is why do we want to be a cartoonist in our 40s?
Okay.
And what's different and what stayed the same for us from our 20s or maybe even our teens. That's probably more accurate.
Yeah, because the transition was just too good to miss, because you led right up with the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, and it's like, well, maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. That's actually a good follow-up to resolution. So let's put a pin in that one for next week. So everyone, we'll see you next week on that one. So back to resolutions.
Yes.
And here's a thing that I wanted to start doing because we're going to have Patreon supporters for ComicLab. I'm going to take photos of the way that I quantify my year for my resolutions.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
I'm going to put them up on Patreon so that you can look at these photos while we're talking about it, because I have found for myself as a cartoonist, there is no external editor for what I do. There's no third party saying, Dave, you need to have this in by Tuesday. Dave, this story event needs to happen in Drive. Dave, you need to update the website again by fall. No one is telling me what to do with my career. It's really only me. That is an amazing blessing to me. I don't want anyone in my life telling me what to do. I love it. But it also means, because I'm an artist, that I can potentially be super lazy.
Yeah.
So I have found that if I don't quantify my life and start tracking, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm doing, here's what I did, that it means that I produce less work. So by hook or by crook, over the last few years, I have fallen into this system between Christmas and New Year's, as I was saying, of really laying out my year. Mm-hmm. And that's not just saying, hey, I want to make a pretty book that people like. It's saying, here are the 9 steps that I have to do to make a book. And here's step 1. And here's the dates that step 1 has to be done by. And here are the 5 sub-steps that make step 1 possible. All right, once that's done, I move on to step 2. So like, it really means breaking down your resolution into quantifiable, achievable, actionable steps to get that action done. Yeah. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to write a short story. The first step is I'm going to write the first sentence of that short story. A, because that'll get you moving, but also because that's a quantifiable, actionable step. You're not forcing yourself to write the whole story. You're just saying, just start. Mm-hmm. Like that is a check-offable thing on your list, is to just start the action. So anyway, the way I break down my year is I have a massive it's basically an Excel sheet, but I do it in Illustrator because it's prettier. Grid of like breaking down the months of the months drop down in horizontal rows. And for January, if you go across the month of January, there's all these different columns for different aspects of my career. So there's Sheldon's Patreon, Drive's Patreon, Tales of the Drive, which are the guest stories for Drive that come in. Now there is one for ComicLab. There's one for kickstarting the Pug book, which will happen in the spring. There's one for kickstarting the Drive book, which will happen in the fall. There's one that has the major dates on my wife's production schedule, because as you know from a marriage, Brad, you need to know what your partner is doing. Because if you have some big event planned right when they have to turn in their television show to the network, you have boned your year, because that's the time where you're going to be needed as a dad.
So that's just being a good partner.
Right. So I have found that I have to incorporate, and what's interesting, that list has now actually grown to not only include my wife, but also my in-laws, who have become immeasurably helpful in my life and in our family's life. So anyway, so I have this huge gridded out thing for month to month. And then next to that chart, I have a monthly wall calendar, those kind of paper. They're probably 20-inch by 30-inch wall calendars. Mm-hmm, you kind of tear it off at the top. And then, so once I get to the month of January or February or March, I then can transfer all that stuff over onto that calendar, but then dates can change. And the reason why I have these physical objects up on the wall is, for whatever reason, my personality responds really well to a visual symbol that I see every day in the studio, reminding me that these actions have to be taken, or that things are coming up. Because if it's in my computer, it's nebulous. If it's in my iCalendar for my iPhone or my Apple, it's still more nebulous. It's out there. I don't see it every day. I don't see it coming closer in the way that, like, when you're finishing a novel and you're at the last 30 pages, you're at the final act. You can feel it coming. You can feel it coming physically. So that's that. And then the final thing that I do, and this is the real thing I want to share with Patreon people and with you as a friend, because I have found it amazing. I bought a 3 foot by 4 foot magnetic board, and then I created magnetic tiles, all of which have the repeated action of the week on them. And the reason why I did it as tiles and not permanently wrote them is if I get sick, if somebody needs to get picked up from school early, if a thing happens which adjusts my day, I take the tile and I move it from Monday to Tuesday. And then I don't have to rewrite my whole list every week. It's all there, it's all pre-printed. Things can move around. And let's say, for example, I have a super productive day. Okay, all the stuff from Wednesday gets shifted forward to Tuesday. And then on that board, next to the magnetic tiles, I also have a bunch of little magnetic, for lack of a better phrase, game pieces. So when an action is done, I put the little magnetic piece next to it. It's basically like a magnetic check off.
Yeah.
And it's great as a visual. I have to say, it's one of the most amazing things that I have stumbled upon in terms of productivity, because it has created such a sense of accountability for me as a cartoonist. And also, I frankly have too many balls juggling in the air at any one time for me to track effectively. And that's just my personality. I don't track multiple things happening at once well. I lose them. If I'm focusing on Drive, I'm forgetting completely about the pre-production on the Drive, the Sheldon Pug book. And if I'm focusing on the Pug book, I'm forgetting to go out and to get artists to do paid guest stories for Drive. And if I'm doing the Drive paid guest stories, I'm forgetting to work on the Kickstarter for the Drive second book. Like all this. So all these things, if I don't quantify it, if I don't track it, they fall by the wayside and they don't get done.
Yeah.
And that's just something that came out of the early years of parenthood. If anybody looks at my career, I dropped a lot of balls because I didn't have any system of place to, how early years of parenthood, you wake up out of a fog of like, all right, I just changed a diaper, and okay, I got 2 hours of cartooning. What do I need to do? And your list is a mile long, but because you haven't quantified that list in any way, you find yourself staring at your desk for 15 minutes, even though you have a limited amount of time and a huge list of to-dos. So this system grew out of that, and it's been really helpful and really effective for me.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be effective, because what I found, having gone through that similar stage in life, is that I was actually super productive because I didn't have to make any decisions. I was always putting out fires. So it wasn't that I had a choice of should I work on this or should I have to work on that. It was, this thing has to get done right now, and then I can do that thing. And I went through such and that's when I was working full time at the newspaper and doing daily comics and being a dad during the day, and because I worked for my day job at night. Every minute was being used for something. And I was super productive during that time. And what I found was, when I left the day job and became a full-time cartoonist, I actually had more time management problems than I ever had before, because for the first time I had to make choices.
Right.
And all of a sudden, everything fell apart. The first year of being independent was a mess, because I had never been used to making choices before. And what that board that you're describing is a way of kind of visualizing those choices, making sure that they don't get forgotten, and making sure that every one of them gets done throughout the day. Because if I just left it up to like a list, that list fell apart by the end of the week.
So this is the part that I think would be most helpful to the world and to me. How did you course correct that from that first year of where you had choices? What survival mechanisms did you put into place?
That's a great question. My off the top of the head answer is that I just got better at it mentally. Because I didn't do a whole lot that I could point to and quantify. I did a little bit better in terms of making lists and keeping things written down, but I got better mental toughness, where I kind of tried to give myself the mental feeling of an impending deadline. And that way I could recreate for myself that constant feeling of, this thing needs to get done. I'll be honest with you. I still don't know that I am doing that as well as I could, or definitely as well as I should.
Yeah, my problem, and this is sort of the universal of the modern age, is that I will really fall into a sinkhole, and so even with a quantified life, I will be like, oh, you know what, I'm going to check out Twitter for 10 minutes. 2 hours later,
Yeah.
and the problem there is like when I was working on a deadline based system, like you were describing, where everything was a fire to be put out. I didn't have time to go onto social media or to mess around with
Right.
checking, this or that in the news. And now that I have more time, that's a serious problem of mine, and I'm trying to figure out different strategies of like, well, do I say no social media between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. and then I get to binge on it right before bed, or but the problem there is that as a cartoonist, I need to be interactive and reactive to social media and to be putting stuff out on social media. So it's really hard to step away from it.
It really is, because again, like we said earlier in the show, social media is your lifeblood now, and you need to, I mean, it's not even a question of a choice. You need to be putting content out on those feeds. Even and this is the thing that cartoonists get wrong all the time. It doesn't even need to be your content. You've got your content, you've got your commercial, and you've got the stuff that you curate. And it's just as fair to go out there and share someone else's post. That's just as important, just as significant on your feed as you coming up with something interesting to say in that moment. And that's where so many and not only that, but I've found it's such a delight because it's something nice you're doing. If I see somebody out there that is promoting something, or hey, I've got a Kickstarter coming up, I've got this, I got that, or just somebody that posted a comic that day that I thought was good, sharing that on my feed is a positive reinforcement for the people that are following me. They don't really care that it didn't come from me. All they care about is, I think this is important, right? And at the same time, you're doing something super nice for somebody else, and really all you're doing is sating that need to have a lot of content in your feed. That other person's doing you a favor, right? By giving you something that you can share.
You're not
But you've got to keep feeding that beast. And unfortunately, I think when I look around at people's social media, they're missing that curation part of social media. They being creators, we think that everything there has got to be something that we've created, and it doesn't.
Right. But but getting back to that idea that you had said where you had developed a mental toughness, that's the one big chink in my armor, which is that if I crack that egg to look at social media, oh man, there's omelet all over me. I'm 2 hours into it and I have wasted a big chunk of my day. And that's just to say, on a very human level, I don't have a solution for that yet. I don't know in 2018 how I fix that problem.
No, and you know what? I mean, part of it is mental toughness, and I gotta be honest with you. Part of it, you've also got to give yourself a break. I found I've also, at the same time, I'm trying to really buckle down, and I think maybe it's a question of timing. But at the same time, I'm trying to buckle down, I'm also trying to loosen up. Like my younger son asked me to play Ultimate Alliance, and they've got it on the PS4. And if you've never played Marvel Ultimate Alliance, it's really a delightful game. Right. But it used to make me crazy because they played it on the Wii, and because of the mechanics of the game, they were constantly making the environment spin, and it would make me dizzy. And I'm like, I can't play this game with you guys. Well, they got it for the PS4, and my younger son was like, Dad, do you want to try and play this? And immediately in my mind, it's like, I really should be doing something. I've got a couple of things I need to get out for Patreon. And you've got to give yourself the ability to say yes to those moments too. You got to say yes to the family moments and the stuff that kind of feeds your soul. Because what happened was I played for an hour and a half. We had great fun, laughed our butts off, and then we got to a good stopper. And I'm like, all right, this is as far as I'm going to be able to go. I'm going to go and crank some stuff out now. And And when I did sit down and do that, I was in such a better mental place to do it than if I had said no to my kid. And then, I'd sit there, feel like a heel for the next hour and a half. I was
Right.
that hour and a half was gone one way or the other. But yeah, I think at the same time, I'm going to try to be more mentally tough this year. I'm also going to try to loosen up a little bit and take those opportunities when they come.
Well, listen, no one's going to argue with you that family time is helpful and delightful and the reason why we live. So I'm just saying that an hour and a half on Twitter doesn't feel like the same as an hour and a half with my wife.
No.
Brad, I haven't kissed my wife. I need to kiss my wife, Brad. That's what I'm saying. This entire thing is just an intervention on my marriage, Brad.
Well, and no, and obviously as a humorist, the obvious retort to that was, you haven't kissed your wife. Think of the last time I've kissed your wife. And I decided that was going to be weird too. So we've gone down two weird paths at the same time.
I like though that you pulled out a genuinely classic vaudeville version of that joke and made me laugh with it. So this is an advertisement for vaudeville, still working in 2018. So what are your we got about we're going to try to keep these to an hour as that's a comfortable podcast length. But so in the last 15 minutes, I want to ask you, what are your crowdfunding goals for 2018? Where are you going with that? What are you doing? What are your plans? What's the scoop?
The big thing, really, what I'm doing in 2018 is building building off of what I started in 2017. And that is what I've been saying for the last couple of years is that the game is now crowdfunding. That should be where where 100% of your steam should be going towards. And the way that's developing for me is I've got I put some money behind a WordPress developer, and the entire Evil Ink site now is going to change, hopefully within the next 6 months, into even more of a public-facing gateway to the stuff I'm doing on Patreon. So, in other words, what this is going to be is, now that Patreon has released their plugin that you can put Patreon protected content on a WordPress site. And then when your Patreon backers sign in, that sign in applies to the site as well, and they can see stuff that they are qualified to see by their pledge level. This is going to mean that Evil Ink is going to start to look a lot more like the PvP site or the Penny Arcade site, where when you get there, there will be 3 or 4 promos at the top that are going to point to the most recent things, and it's going to be more of a gateway into the different stuff that is going to be available to you. And that is something I'm really super excited to see how that gets received. This will be the year truly that it becomes more clear than ever that that crowdfunding is the main, and that also means that like, for example, I've spent the last 2 years really concentrating on the $10 level for obvious reasons. But what I also want to do this year for my $1 and my $5 backers is to build out what they have available. So like I've said before, that means that at some point the archives are going to be a pledge level reward. That means, like, some of my other sites like Greystone Inn or Courting Disaster or Fables, those become Patreon rewards. And it's going to be a way for me to make those $1 and $5 rewards more and more valuable. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to make that work. There's going to be a lot of moving parts to that. There's making that whole thing go is going to be, which is why I brought in a developer, because there's no way this is not a DIY project in the slightest.
Right.
But it's going to be, my vision for this is that that the Evil Ink site is going to be a gateway, much like the Penny Arcade site is. And then based on your pledge level, you're going to be either be able to read the After Dark stuff, or you're going to be able to see a bigger swath of the Evil Ink Archives or the Greystone stuff. And that's also going to mean reformatting. Greystone I did back when monitors were 800 by 600, so it's going to mean taking that stuff and reformatting those strips so they really look good on today's monitors. And really, for the first time in 5 to maybe 10 years, getting the full value out of that stuff that I haven't gotten since the ad revenue business model crashed and burned back in 2014 or so.
I'm really impressed that you're planting your flag so firmly on this, because it's kind of like webcomic site design 3.0, if you think about it. The first one was like, hey, I'm just going to put my comics on the web, and that was kind of us around the turn of the century. And then maybe 5 or so years later, we all kind of designed sites that were optimized for stores and for advertising. And then now, about 10 years later, you're making what I think is one of the earlier switches to a crowdfunding-based website, which is interesting. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Well, it's something I when I was reflecting on this, and by reflecting, I mean feeling sorry for myself. When advertising went bust, I looked at what I had done, and it's like, this is really bad, because I spent 12 to 14 years, depending on what time period you actually consider the bust to happen. I spent almost 15 years building up a business that had positive reward for nothing more than page views. So you and me had a huge, tremendous advantage going into 2014. We had a lot of content on the web. And when you build up past a certain tipping point, a couple thousand comics, you can, under a healthy ad model, you could make a lot of money just out of the people that happen to find your stuff by mistake.
Right, or those readers, or the one in 100 readers, like, I'm going to read a couple thousand right now, and you're like, hey, all right, great.
And so by those incidental hits of somebody finding you by mistake, a certain percentage of those you turn into readers, and a certain percentage of the readers that turn into voracious readers, you could do really well on the web. And I looked at what I had, and all of a sudden, all of those thousands of comics that I'd put out into the world had zero value. I was getting no value out of them other than the print collections, right?
Right.
So the question became, listen, I'm not going to just leave this by the wayside. I need to find a way to get value into that again. And the only way to do that is to put them behind a paywall and make them Patreon rewards. The bad news is that, yes, at some point, the entire Greystone archive goes behind a paywall. The good news is it's going to be like at the $1 level. This is not going to be, if anybody actually wants to read that stuff, $1 is not going to stop them.
Right. I tip my hat to you both as a friend and as a peer, or should I say peer and as a friend, that you are making the shift, because this is a big one, and it's a bold move, and it's probably a little bit scary, but also a little bit exciting to make this change. And I doff my cap to you that you're doing it. It's for real. It's a big move.
I'm excited about it. But the other thing is, as we both know, there's no drastic danger to doing this. If I do this and it tanks, the worst I'm out is some hopefully tax deductible. Maybe there is a danger, but assuming certain things stay the same, I'll be these payments I'm making to a developer. These are going to be tax deductions. The very worst that happens, it crashes and burns. I learn from it. I convert the site back and move on.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. It's. I'm just saying I'm proud of you. It's a good move, and I think you'll do well with it. I really have. I think we've both seen, you with Evil Ink and myself with Drive mainly, that crowdfunding is where the big movement is in webcomics and comics in general.
Absolutely.
I think it's frankly the solution we've been waiting for about a decade, if not longer, in terms of a form of micropayments. And I absolutely am planting my flag in distributed crowdfunding between Kickstarter and Patreon for the next 3 to 5 years, provided they don't shit the bed. Pardon my French. Then I think
speaking of one of the low points of 2017.
But I think, provided they don't blow it, I think Kickstarter and Patreon can be a magic 1-2 punch that then we build the rest of our career around, and the rest of the career being occasional book sales, occasional product sales, occasional Comic-Con appearances, this or that. But the bulk of my career, I think, for the next couple of years, is maybe 1 to 2 books a year on Kickstarter, and then the rest of my work on Patreon. It speaks to the fact that even we're going to be doing ComicLab on Patreon. That's how big of believers we are on it. So
absolutely.
So anyway, maybe on that note, we should mention that if you found this link via the social medias or the Twitters or the Facebooks, do check us out over at patreon.com/ComicLab. We would appreciate and love the support. What we're looking to do in the coming year is, if we can gather enough folks that believe in the joy of comics and talking about the making of comics and how to make a living from comics, that we can fund both a permanent and a concrete editor who will sit down with the audio files every week and make the show, give it the best polish it can. And then as we go forward, maybe more and better audio equipment for the studios so that we can sound like the truly delightful professionals that we are.
And on that note, you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of Webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-inc.com.
And that guy over there, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your generous support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab.